Donald here, and these are 5 things I personally learned from Hunt, Gather, Parent, what ancient cultures can teach us about the lost art of raising happy, helpful little humans, by, I can't say her name very well, but Michaeleen Doucliff. Hunt, Gather, Parent is a book that a lot of people were recommending online. It's a relatively modern book. I think it only came out a couple years ago. And I wanted to give it a shot because my wife and I are actually having our first baby soon. And I definitely want to have a little basis in my parenting, and I guess I'm humble enough to realize I don't really know much about parenting, if anything at all. So let me try and get some good information before I start all this. The author who wrote this book wrote it in a very casual and formal way, and she has a very eclectic personality, but not in a bad way. She's fun. She definitely has a lot of parenting struggles, and she talks about that in great depth. And this is almost like her personal story, and it's kind of extreme, right? Because what the author did was she spent about 6 months to a year traveling the world to these kind of isolated locations to learn parenting tips from people, and she lived with those people too. Alright, the first thing I learned from this book is 1. A family is a team. You know, the author talks about 2 different types of parenting that are very common. The one is the classic helicopter parent, where the parent, it's kind of like Asian parents, right? The parents tell the kids exactly what they're supposed to do. You know, you have to have a straight A's, learn this instrument, this, as in the parents maintain strict control. And the reverse side of that is like the free range parents, where in this case, you might even say it's parental neglect, where the kids just do whatever they want. And as long as they're not in jail, the parents don't really care. And that, I think it's fair to say, it's almost neglectful in the opposite way, because you're not really teaching them anything and they're not really learning anything. You know, they might be learning all the bad things then, right? This is a completely hands-off approach. But what the author saw in some of these cultures was that the family is a team. Like, every member needs to contribute, and every member is valued for their contribution, and every member is also self-sufficient. It's like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It is an interdependent team where everybody needs each other, but they're also capable of working on their own as needed. Number 2, I learned that you should teach autonomy early and make your child into a contributing member. Now, autonomy should be separated from independence. And independence kind of has this feel of they just do their own thing, right? You know, you go into your room, you close the door, you do your thing for 6 hours, you come out, you know, you're independent. But really, autonomy is you know how to learn and you know how to grow, and you know when to help and when you can relax. This is essential for having your family members become contributing members. For example, like teaching your toddlers how to put their toys away. Like, that would make them autonomous, because that's an expectation that they clean up after themselves. And that actually segues nicely into my third point. Number 3, let the child learn and keep your verbal corrections minimal. This is where it might get a little bit more debatable. What I learned was the child is constantly learning and constantly making mistakes. And if you correct your child too much, what you're almost doing is you're invalidating their learning. You're telling them what they should learn rather than letting them learn and fail by themselves. And then maybe they become afraid of failure, or they become dependent on your training. And the point was to let the child learn, even if they do it wrong, even if they do it completely wrong, let them learn. Give minimal corrections as needed. I mean, some corrections will be needed, right? Especially if you're trying to teach them knives or something, but keep it minimal, let them learn. Build up their own confidence through their error making and success and failures and triumphs. Number 4, calmness always. is a really strong point this book went into. Even when you want to get mad, or even when you want to punish, being calm is essential. And I personally agree with this. I find myself to be a very calm person. In fact, as a child, I was always really calm. I wouldn't cry very often. I wouldn't get in too many fights. From what I hear, I wasn't much of a crier when I was a baby either. And calmness helps your kids not fear you, but also look up to you. Your kids will emulate your behavior. So if you are calm, the child will eventually start to emulate calmness. Whereas if you're mad, you are really teaching your child, hey, if someone does X to me that I don't like, the proper response as modeled by my parent is to get mad or cry or shout. And that gets into a good point of the child is always watching us and learning behaviors. And some of these behaviors can be learned for an entire lifetime, such as temper tantrums. I'm sure we all know people who have temper tantrums and they're in their 50s. It's just something they learned as a child, and it's just stuck with them. And maybe they weren't aware of it, and maybe they didn't work on it to remove that bad habit. If you teach a habit of calmness, when they grow up, they'll start learning calmness, and even as a toddler, they'll learn to be more calm in situations. Number 5, teach the children stories. The kids will relax because it's a fun story, but then they will also listen. For sure, there are stories that I read personally and that I've heard that I still remember to this day, like distinctly and strongly. And I've always had a love of stories because I used to have a fairy tale book when I was illustrated fairy tale book when I was a child. It's also a good way to teach values. I think that's a huge part of why stories have been used in all cultures. I reviewed a book earlier called Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And yeah, every culture has stories because stories teach. And likewise, the author here really encourages us to teach through stories, even stories that we make up ourselves. And those are 5 things I learned from Hunt, Gather, Parent. I really enjoyed this book. You know, the author was a little bit goofy sometimes, she seemed to have a pretty hellish toddler experience. Hopefully I don't have that, but maybe I will. I overall found this book to be very helpful though. I will definitely be implementing each one of these tips. And I think your mileage may vary, but I don't feel like anything here was too out of line. Like I've seen this kind of behavior in Japan, in Peru, in South America, right? In Europe, in America. So I think all these are pretty sound principles. Nothing too crazy. Right, that's what I learned. Let me know if you've read this book or if you've learned anything else that you would like to add. A tip 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or etc., etc. Right, thanks. Bye-bye.